Now, this is something that is easy to do. Again, schemas just help us to protect data. Now, creating a view is something that's important because there may be times where we want them to see data from another table, but we don't want them to have select access to that table. So what we can do instead is we can give them a view. And now the view here that I created is for the professor's pros. And what it allows us to do is it allows me to create a role or create a view where our professor schema people can still have access to something that is in a protected database, a database that they don't normally have access to. In this case, what I've given them access to is the Pokemon species and name, which is part of the tables that they can normally see. But this one right here comes from a completely different table. And it still allows them to see the data because in this particular case, we've said, okay, this particular data from this particular table, this column is important. And we want them to be able to see that. So that is right there, and you can see that they can see the data. But they can't see anything else. They can't go and find another table to do a search on. They can simply just do the search, the selects on, oops, clicked a little quick, didn't I? They can do the search on any table that they have access to, and you can see that it gives them access to, well, for some reason it didn't work there, but it gives them access to the data that they want. All right. So why is that important? Again, because it gives us the ability to control what data is being seen and by whom. There are going to be times when, we're going to be collecting data. For instance, a big one is Social Security numbers. HR needs that information for tax purposes, for payroll purposes, for things like that. That is necessary for payroll and HR. But it's not necessary for me as a hiring manager necessarily to know the Social Security number of the people who report to me. But it's data that we need to collect. So what we can do is we can put that Social Security number into a table that is accessible only to HR and only to payroll. But there might be data on that table that I do need access to. So, for instance, maybe their hire date, or maybe test scores that they had during the hiring process. So what we can do is by creating a view, I can still have access to the data that I need without having access to the data that I'm not supposed to see. So that's where views come into. They allow us to see information on tables that aren't necessarily part of my schema, but may contain information that I need to be able to see. All right, creating database roles is another way that we can secure our data and make sure that people are only seeing the things that we want them to see. So I created a new user, Final Running Buddy, who is going to have some access to a role. But to get to database roles, I need to come back up here to the system admin. And we're going to come up to security. We're going to go to roles and database roles. Now to create a database role, very easy. Just right click on database, go to new database roles. I give the role a name. In this case, I called it DB Professors Admin for the role that I was creating. This is a very highly skilled admin position that is specifically just for the professor's schema. And can come in here. I can go down to role and add members. And in this case, I put in the running buddy. I can click on that. I could look at securables and say, okay, what is this role going to have availability for? So we're going to say, well, let's look at specific tables and schemas and views that we want them to have access to. So in this case, for this role, even though they're part of the professor's group, technically, that was weird. Oh, it's just taking a little while. And since they're technically part of the professor's group, They would not necessarily have access to tables and such that are outside of the professor schema, but by creating a database role, we can then add things to their availability that aren't necessarily part of the schema that they're part of. So for instance, we could add the professor's tables to professor schema's tables to it, but we can also come in and say, oh, you know what? Well, in addition to having the professor's stuff, which we gave them access to, so you can see we could select that and we can select that, but we could say, oh, you know what? I also want them to have access to the habitats database that they can make selections from. And so I can create that, and it will eventually, when I click on OK, it would then create a situation like with professor's admin, where it has access to not just the professor's one, but I also gave it access to these three databases. There's the view that I gave it access to, and these two tables here, so that they can have access to data that they need for their specific role. Again, this would be something like an admin might need a little bit more access than a regular user might, or a supervisor admin might have access to certain tables that a regular entry-level admin might not have access to. It allows us to more fully customize how people in specific roles are accessing the data that we have in our database. All right. Now the last one that we want to look at is the final running buddy. This is the idea of encryption. We're going to encrypt certain data. So for instance, we want them to have access to this particular table, and I think this is the one. Let me run it real quick. So we want to do, maybe it was this one. I'm getting these two confused. Yeah, here we go. So let's say, for instance, we want them to have access to the ability ID, the version group ID, and the language ID, but the flavor text, that's a little bit, secretive. We don't want that to be something that they have access to. So what we can do is we can say, okay, we're going to give them access to this particular table, but we're going to encrypt that column so that they cannot see the data. Like you can see here, the flavor text has been replaced by this random assembly of numbers, which isn't truly random, but you can see that that's the case for running buddy. So when they run that, the column is encrypted. They can't see it. I mean, it's a very easy thing to do. We simply come up here to that particular column. Let's go to that database, which was ability flavor text. And we can come up here to the flavor text. We can go on encrypt column. That's going to bring up our encrypt column wizard. So click on next. We're going to say we want to select this particular column. That is the column that we already randomized. Here I selected randomize as the encryption type, and I just went with the default. And then I clicked on next and went through the process. And when all was said and done, I had encrypted that particular column. Again, encryption gives us even more finite control over the data that is being seen by the users. It allows us to say, oh yeah, you know what? There is a social security number here, but you're not allowed to see it. Boom, here's the encrypted data. And that's why we have these different levels of encryption that allow, or different levels of security that allow us to really, really fine tune exactly how we are displaying this data and to whom. All right, last thing, engage with a business partner. Did that. So first thing that I did is I did log into another person's server, and you can see here I was able to log in. I can see the tables that they're restricted to. They're restricted specifically to the foods group. So, and that they have been given access to another one outside of their Purview, which is the Pokemon species database. They have I've got their view, and I can run select queries on all of these. I'm not sure why it's taking so long, but and so I provided the feedback to him and explained to him I thought he did a great job. I see that there are databases here that they're limited. I don't have access to all of the tables. I do have the view. If I go to the species table, you can see that it runs that, and that it in fact does have 2 encrypted columns. So everything was done correctly. Again, I forget the gentleman's name because I closed my Microsoft tasks, but did really well. I think he did everything correctly. It's good to go. I also had mine reviewed by one of my running buddies, and I can bring that up here. I think his name is Ika or Ika, Mr. Pulotu, and he reviewed mine. You can see here he included a screenshot showing the encrypted table. His feedback to me was, good job, worked really well. Here's the screenshot. So all in all, was able to accomplish all that. So what does all this mean? As I've been saying throughout the presentation, the strategies that we're looking for is we're looking to create a data bank, a database that contains all of the data that we're going to need to interact with our client base or our customer base. But we're going to also be looking at how do we protect that data from eyes that shouldn't see it. We know that we need to collect certain pieces of information in order to track customer purchases and things, but a credit card is not something that is necessarily needed to be seen by the person, helping the customer at a customer service desk. So, by creating these strategies, we were able to create access to our data in such a way that as we expand and grow, creating these roles, creating the views, creating the encrypted columns, by doing all of this, we are able to control how information is seen. And it doesn't matter how big or how small we are. As we grow, these roles and these views and things will grow with the business and will help us to be able to be prepared to make sure that people who are added to the organization, that they get added correctly, they're only going to have access to the information that we want them to have access to. So now the last part is, what do we do about expansion? Now you can have a dedicated server, and that is always a great idea to do if you've got the money and the facilities and the physical assets to do that. But another option that is becoming more and more popular, more and more affordable, is to move this data and this information to cloud-based virtual machines. And doing that allows you to scale on an instantaneous or nearly instantaneous basis. And that is huge. That allows you to scale immediately. I don't have to order a new server. I don't have to have somebody come in and install the software and put on the application and get it connected to the internet. I can do all of this by building these containers, by building these images, by building these virtual machines. I can then copy the virtual machine over to create a new one, to expand my ability. I can create container images, then I can use those images to create new containers instantly. I can have that information working and up and running in a matter of minutes rather than a matter of days or weeks. And this allows us to take our scalability to a whole new level and allows us to be able to do these things economically as well as efficiently and effectively. That's my presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and you guys all have a great rest of the semester. Thank you.